Hey everybody, it's Matt Johnson. We're back with another episode of the Level Up podcast. We've got Greg Harrelson here. We've got a great guest here, and we're going to talk about how to take over 30 listings a month without a single outbound phone call. So that is going to be very, very interesting to a lot of people in our audience. I know they're going to be psyched for this particular interview. So first of all, if you're watching this live with us on Facebook, we really appreciate it. Make sure that you put your questions for Greg and Jan right here in the comments below the video. And if you're watching later on YouTube, or if you're listening on iTunes and Stitcher, you can still go back and shoot us comments and questions, or go back to our Facebook page for the Level Up podcast, and we're happy to answer anything that you want to know about how this is done. But we're going to go deep on this today. So first of all, let's welcome in Greg. Greg, how's it going today?
Hey, doing good. I'm excited to be here with a dear friend and partner, Jan. So I think the audience is going to get just a ton. I think this is going to be one of those podcasts, because Jan and I work intimately so close together in our office. This is going to be kind of an under the hood type of podcast, not just one of those interview types of deals. So I think this is going to be neat.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll be able to actually go deep on some of this stuff. And it's not just a fluffy kind of, hey, how'd you get to be so successful, and just brush across the surface. Let's get into the nitty gritty on things. So first of all, Jan Pitman. Jan, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
So give us a little bit of background on just kind of who you are now. We'll get into kind of where you came from, but what role do you serve right now in Greg's organization, and how do you guys work together?
Mm-hmm. So Greg and I are partners in Century 21 Barefoot Realty, which is a company that we acquired several years ago. And then I also work directly with Greg at Century 21, the Harrelson Group, as a listing agent on his team.
Okay, perfect. So let's go into the background of how you came to jump into kind of the partnership arena. So where did you come from initially? How did you guys first meet?
So I first met Greg at a career seminar 13 years ago. Believe it or not, I saw a little blip in the paper and decided to attend it because I was a little interested in real estate. And once I met Greg and saw what he had to say, he was so diametrically opposite from anything I'd ever seen before that I decided that I wanted to get into real estate, and it was going to be with him.
Very cool. Yeah. So Greg, what's your recollection of that, if anything?
I think my recollection was she may have reached out to go to the seminar, and maybe she actually was hesitant of going. And then my dad was still working with me at that time, and he probably was hounding her. You're going to show up. You're going to show up. You're going to show up. And then she showed up. And the reality is a lot of people who know me, they know I'm a worker bee. And I think what you'll see is Jan and I are really cut from the same cloth in that standpoint, is we're both workers. And that was probably when she says that I was different. I was actually speaking a language that she speaks also, is that real estate is not just one of those things you get a license, you automatically money just flows in. It was me painting a picture of you get a license and then you follow these strategies. And if you work hard and commit to it, then you will create a great opportunity for you. I think that's really the message that I was sharing, and knowing Jan as well as we know each other, I can imagine that message would resonate well, because she's definitely not going to fall for any get rich quick type of presentations.
Not so much, Jan.
Right. No. So that's where it started 13 years ago. And I absolutely came into the office and I believed in Greg and what he was doing. Really knew nothing about him because I had moved from New York to Myrtle Beach, knew nothing about Greg or the industry. So I didn't join Greg because of his reputation in the business. I joined him because I met him and believed he was very real and knew what he was doing. So I got into the business and I said to myself, obviously I'm a very competitive person and I want to be successful at whatever I do. So I said, when this man says jump, I'm going to ask him how high. So I absolutely, for the first 5 years in business with Greg, did, and I don't care what he told me to do, I did it. And at sometimes it was a little challenging for me because we did butt heads many times, but I did respect him enough to listen to exactly what he said. And I did do it sometimes begrudgingly, but it certainly paid off for me. I quickly became a top producer, probably after the first 5 years or so, doing 100 plus deals a year, and got into some builder marketing with Greg because there were a lot of projects that had died in this area at that time. So we kind of formulated a plan to go in and help builders clean up their standing inventory and tell them what they needed to do in order to get out of their community, make some money and get out and move on with that. And then several years after that, Greg's dad, who I absolutely loved, he was a fantastic man, Ron Harrelson, he was leaving the business. And I kind of talked to Greg about the fact that he was going to have this void without his dad there. And I thought that we would make a really good fit listing property together because we had very similar styles. And so we started doing that. And from that time on, it's just kind of history. We, did some great listing business together, closed a lot of deals. And then I just kind of progressed into recruiting some agents because I really felt so strongly about our company and what we were doing. I believed that I needed to get the word out. So I, by mistake, started recruiting people and then ended up, getting into it a little bit more seriously and then helping with the coaching and training in the company. And then kind of went from there to becoming partners with Greg and Barefoot Realty.
Yeah. So that was Matt, and for those of you listening, that was actually a very good, quick little summary of from agent to entrepreneur. But Jan, let's go back a little bit and say, okay, what were some of the first things that you did and I told you to do, or we talked about doing, when it come in the beginning? Because I know you were you came in, I said prospect, you said okay, and you took it on. But if I remember correctly, did you start working with buyers?
Yes, I did. No, I did. So actually what happened was obviously we were all scripts, we learned our scripts. I learned all my scripts and started cold calling every day, just cold called probably for the first 3 years in the business. I cold called just listed, just sold. And at that time, things were changing in the market and people would say, heck, I'm not selling at this price. I'd say, okay, great. If you're not selling, how about buying and cost averaging out your investment here, So I ended up getting more buyers by cold calling for just listed and just sold than I did sellers. So I kind of naturally fell into working with all of these buyers who wanted to, buy property. And I did that for quite a while. And I think that my strength, of course, was that I was extremely disciplined. I did exactly what I was told. And I prospected for 3 hours, Monday through Friday. I always, in the beginning, worked 2 nights a week and every Saturday. So I did a lot of prospecting. I was at that time making 50 plus contacts a day.
So I'm going to interrupt you a few times throughout today, Jan, and there's a reason, because I can already tell where this podcast is going. There is going to be so many nuggets come out of this, and the nuggets are going to come from what you need to be observing right now is the relationship between coach and player. Because I'm already remembering all these conversations that we had, Jan, that kind of led us up to where we are. And I know the title of this podcast is the fact that, yes, we do have been averaging 28, 30 listings a month consistently for quite a while. And we do that without calling expireds and FSBOs and rentbos and cold calling. We're really not making outbound call. But in order to get us there, 13 years ago, we were at a different place. Correct. We weren't even in a partnership. We were just in a, I'm an owner of a company and coaching you and whatnot. So but the first nugget that I want everyone to make a note of is this. She was calling just solds, just listeds, and finding buyers. Now, most people would say, well, how do you prospect for buyers? Well, it wasn't that she was finding buyers. She was just calling just listed and just sold, and she was listening, digging deep into the conversations and identifying opportunities where most people think that they're only going to find listing opportunities. She was listening for opportunities, and they showed up in place in the buyer side just as much on the listing side. And today people just don't recognize that. They don't think that can be done, but it was your listening that created that. Now, you were making your 50 contacts, but we had a very important conversation that transitioned you from really focusing, because at that time you were doing a lot of buyers, but then there was something that happened. We had a conversation, and I think it went somewhat alike. You're not going to make money looking through a windshield, meaning you're spending too much time working with these buyers. And then you made a transition. Again, I think this is a pivotal point, a very important part of our relationship. Do you remember that and what that was all about?
I do, and I'd like to be frank about it because it's still very vivid in my mind. Okay. So I was at that time, I think it was like my 3rd or 4th year in business, and I was closing probably close to 80 transactions a year, and 60 something of them was buyers, probably, very little listing. And one day you walked up to me and at my station and you said to me, you are no longer working with buyers, you're a listing agent now. And you took every lead off of my desk and threw it in the trash. And it was like a heart-stopping moment for me. It took my breath away. I was like, it was like my blankie. You just threw my blankie away. Like, what are you doing to me? These are my buyers, And And from that day on, I just took, I always do a few buyers every year just because I have, people that recommend me and they want to work with me. So I probably close about 10 to 15 buyer deals a year, very, very easily. No work really involved. But for the most part, I'm, 95% listing agent, and I'm thankful every day for that, because it was such a great.
Why I remember that. Okay. And the audience is probably sitting here saying, oh my God, I'd never be able to work with him if he could do that to me. But that's not a common strategy.
Correct.
But it was a necessary strategy based on what you wanted to get out of your career. Right.
Correct.
And what was happening with you, like so many, is they're working with buyers, want to be on the listing side so they can have more freedom and more control over their time, and it's easier to scale the listing side. But when you're doing such a good buyer business and you say, oh my God, I'll start listing tomorrow. I've got one more buyer. Well, I've got 5 more buyers coming in the next 2 weeks. Once I'm done with these, then I'll start doing this. And I think that conversation was going on and on and on, where you're going to move in this direction when you're ready, but the ready always got pushed back. The can always got kicked down the road. And I think it got to a point where, I said as a coach, there's only one way to do this, and that is to absolutely cut it off right now. Because you would sneak around and do stuff. It's like, okay, I'm going to just do it this way, but you would find yourself, well, here's an easy one. I'm just going to go after it. Is that how you kind of remember it? Because that's kind of what I believe.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, and it was our relationship at the time too. I mean, we're both very frank people, and you knew that if you didn't approach me in that way, I was always going to have that little security on the side. So it was, it was a necessary action for you to do in order for me to stop what I was doing to get where I really wanted to go.
So what happened to your listing business then? Okay, so now you're like, you're dropping some of these the buyer deals, and you're not one that likes to go backwards on your numbers, even though I say sometimes it's okay to step backwards, to take 2 steps forward. You don't seem to ever like that. You want to always move forward. So I was threatening you at this point, in the sense of you were being threatened with the prospect or the possibility that you were going to take a step backwards, but I don't think you really did. So how did you really make that transition and into, like, I'm really going after listings, and tell the audience what you started producing at that time?
So at that time I started, I had always been calling just listed, just sold, and I started calling expireds at that time. So that's when I really took off. I mean, I probably, the first month I probably took 25 listings. I mean, I'm all about failure's not an option. So I just said, if they can do it, I can do it. I mean, what's the big deal? So now that I've cut the cord with the buyers, I'm just going to be a listing agent, and nobody's going to beat me. So that was my, nobody can beat, it's just not happening. I just don't allow that. So I was determined that I was going to, beat everybody, and I did. So it was good.
Yeah. And I will say for you, audience, that the people she really enjoys beating are really the men. So anytime like the men step up and want to have a competition, she's always the one that's like the most threatening, which people don't see it. It kind of comes out of nowhere. But I think you're going to get really quick on this podcast that, who she is and why she ends up on the top most of the time. So then you and I started making my own transition, because at this time I was still doing a little bit of more I was doing some listings at that time also. And when I say listings at that time, meaning I was still prospecting some lead sources to acquire listings at that time. So you were getting some listings, I was getting some listings, and then you and I started kind of like creating our own little mini team within inside of our big company, which we really run as a team in a way. We kind of created our own little mini team, but not to compete against any of the agents, because that's another thing people wonder, like, how does Greg Still and Jan do a little bit of business, but not really compete against the other agents? But we've done it because we've built databases. So now if we go backwards to the time when you first started, one of the things that you did was you started collecting emails and getting all these emails, as well as I was, and we built databases. Can you talk a little bit on that, and then maybe kind of share with the audience now how we're actually creating so much business without making outbound calls?
Right. So at that time, what you talked about with us was never ever get off the phone without getting an email, because that's going to be valuable someday. Like at that time, databases were not a big thing. at all. To people, you were starting to build them, but nobody really knew what they're going to do with them. So
Yes.
I said, all right, well, you told me to do it, so I did it. So I never hung up the phone without getting an email from whatever client it was and whoever I was talking to. And certainly the projects that we worked on and all of that, we collected all the emails from everybody that ever walked in the door. So that was one thing that I trained everybody on, was don't ever let anybody walk out of here without their name, phone number, and email address. And email is as important as anything else. So we started collecting lots and lots. I mean, I remember when we had competitions on how many emails we could get every day. So that was a lot of fun. And then, of course, all of a sudden the database is 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Now what is it? 200,000? I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, the total database is well over
Right.
200. Of course, we didn't collect all those emails, you and I one-on-one, but you and I collected a ton of emails. And so there's another nugget right there. And the nugget is not, hey, everybody start collecting emails. No, the nugget is, Jan and I had a conversation of, hey, let's collect the data on these people, document it. I don't even know what the heck we're going to be able to do with it. We'll figure that out sometime in the future. And then that's when we got into Infusionsoft and started writing campaigns. But at the time we first started collecting, it was like, hey, let's get this information because we may be able to leverage it later on down the road. And it was really simple. All we had to do is, when we're talking to somebody and they said, no, I don't want to sell, all we had to say, hey, no problem. You may not know, Jan, but a lot of your neighbors have requested that I keep them up to date as to what's going on in the real estate market. At least in the neighborhood, what's your best email? I'll make sure you get the same information. And I mean, how much resistance did you have in them giving the email?
Sometimes we had a lot of resistance to it. In the beginning, it was nobody wanted to give it out because everybody was getting so much junk email. But everything's in the presentation, right? So when you present it properly, they give you everything you want. So I really never had a challenge getting an email. It's very easy for me to do that. So yeah. I got that, and the great part about it was, in the beginning, I identified that I'd get say 50 emails in a week, and then I would just say, gee, I'm sitting here on a Sunday, I'm going to email 10 people and see, that I've talked to in the past, and see, what if they're looking to do anything right now. And I just shoot them off a quick email, and I started getting business doing that, just emailing people by myself. And then of course we grew to being, having all these databases and Infusionsoft and all those other things. But I learned pretty quickly after Greg had me do it that it was definitely going to have some worth to me, because I didn't have to then call people. It was a lot of, at that time I would, obviously not cut down on my prospecting time, but I was, adding to my listings just by sending, shooting off quick emails and things to people I had talked to in the past.
Yeah. So how many leads or how many listings will you take this month?
This month I'll probably take 22 listings.
22, and then maybe I'll make up the rest, and we'll get somewhere in that 28, 30, that range. So how many expired calls will you make?
None.
How many for sale owner calls will you make?
None. Ugh. None. That's a lot of work.
Okay. Cold calls. How many cold calls will you make?
None.
Okay, so you're going to take 22 listens. You're not going to do expires. And listen, this conversation has nothing to do with the audience saying, hey, I don't need to call expireds and FSBOs. Let me tell you something. You do need to call expireds and FSBOs. There's no doubt about it. You need to be a calling fiend. But this conversation is about from agent to entrepreneur. So in order for her to transition from agent to entrepreneur and not take a step backwards in income, we had to figure out, how do we create a scenario where instead of calculating how many outbound contacts we make, how about let's figure out the systems to generate X amount of inbound calls. Instead of saying I need 30 people, I need to make 30 outbound contacts a day, what if I got 7 inbound calls today? 7 inbound calls today would convert at way better than 30 outbound contacts today. So that's the game we started playing, is how do we actually start setting up the systems where people are calling us. Now, nugget is she and I built the database. We then nurtured the database. We sent them emails, not about salesy stuff. We sent them emails that was informative. We then created almost a brand, or at least we created an identity within that database as being the authority for all things real estate in their community or in their market. So over time, they may be receiving emails from us for 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, not ever thinking about doing anything. And then randomly somebody just emails and says, Jan, I'm thinking about selling. Can you help me? I've been getting your emails for the last 5 years. And here they'll say this all the time. I don't even know how you got my email address, because they don't remember the conversation 5 years ago. They just know that we've been so darn consistent about having them set up on a drip, and we added value to their lives by educating them on the market. And now they're calling her, and she'll take 22 listings this month without actually having to call all these other people. Now, with that being said, Jan, I will say, okay, Jan and I did not design this for Jan to not have to work and just make life easy, where she's now doesn't have to make all these outbound calls to get these listings. We created this system so she could then leverage technology to maintain the level of business that she's at. So then she can now play a different game, which is the entrepreneur game. So let's talk a little bit more about what we're doing together in building a company. Like where, right now, how many agents are at the Barefoot office?
So right now we have 34 agents at the Barefoot office.
Wow. How many was it like 3 months ago?
Oh gosh, it was 20 maybe.
Okay. So got it. So you're
done some good recruiting.
Jan doesn't like to lose. So she's playing it good. That's a very good a growth in a short period of time. And so again, you are my partner, so the audience knows that. And what does your day look like now? Because you got some listings going on here. You're trying to build a company. What does your day look like as an entrepreneur?
So right now, I typically am on the phones. I'll be at either office, whether it's Harrelson or Barefoot, by about 7:45, and I'm on the phones by 8 o'clock. And typically, I'll be either returning calls or making some calls to my database between 8 and 10 o'clock. And then once 10 o'clock is over, I go into my office and I start doing some things I need to do with recruiting and things like that. But of course, in that time, there are agents around me that are, asking me questions, and I'm just helping them coach them through the challenges that they might be having on the phones and things like that. So typically, on the phones myself, and then also coaching them through some challenges that they're having maybe while they're on the phones, or some questions that they need answered. And then 10 o'clock or so, I go into my office and start making some recruiting calls and talking to people about, joining our company and so forth. And then 11 o'clock, probably 3 days a week in Barefoot, I kind of have everybody out in the prospecting room. We kind of talk about what they're doing and any challenges they might be having and things like that. So just really want to be there to support them and see. I mean, our goal always is to get agents up and running very, very quickly, and to let them become as successful as they can be. And that's the joy in the business, really.
Yeah. So, I'll point out another nugget, and I'm sorry, audience, if you're getting tired of me saying that, but I'm listening, and I'm like, hey, look, this is something we need to understand here. So what I heard Jan say, everyone probably hears, these podcasts, differently, but what I heard Jan say is like, hey, look, I'm transitioning to now maintaining my income and generating listings, but I'm doing it more through generating them through database. She did say I do make some calls to my database, so she didn't, not cold calls and whatnot, but she's calling and keeping that database engaged. But when you're making those calls, this is the point that I wanted to make. This is a great way of transitioning from agent to entrepreneur. When you're making those calls, there's other people listening to you make calls, and those are agents that you've recruited, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So do you see that, audience, that is a way that she is able to demonstrate through example of what these agents should be doing? And so she's showing them, not telling them, and then she's given them an opportunity to do it by her. So while she's making calls, they're listening. When she's taking calls and whatnot, they're listening. And when she's doing her busy work, she's in the room with them and she's listening to them. So it's a fantastic way to kind of double dip. You're actually in you're doing an activity that generates income. At the same time, you're leveraging yourself by having others listen to you. Therefore, they're getting trained, which is now going to generate more income for the company, which she is a part owner of. She's actually making two different revenue streams out of the same minute. That's what I call entrepreneur. Thoughts on that, Matt? What about you? I know you're a thinker. You're just like, okay, let's dig under this thing. Go ahead, Matt. I know you got something to say.
Man. Well, you sent my head reeling for a second, because I was already going down the trail of thinking about how to apply this to my own business. So that is fantastic, and that's one of my goals. And maybe not articulated that way, but when you look at like the highest leverage way that you can spend your time, that is a great way to put it. You can look in terms of like the effectiveness or the productivity for the time that you invest, but a lot of times that comes down to like squeezing that extra 20% of productivity out of something. So I was thinking just in terms over the last couple of weeks about like using the 80-20 rule and jumping from, rather than trying to squeeze the last 20% of productivity or effectiveness out of a particular strategy, either adding something or like you mentioned, like doing something where the same minutes serve two different purposes. Yes. So you take the vital few, the 20% of activities that you can do to produce results in one area. Dude, if you can find it in the same thing serves the same purpose for another area, and you can figure out how to generate money off of something else, then that time becomes 5-10 times more effective. Not because you squeezed that little extra juice of productivity out of it, but because you found a way to make the jump and add something else that's a vital few for some other revenue stream and do the exact same thing. Jeff Cohn's a great example of that. So doing, like running his real estate team, but then monetizing that by inviting people in for a workshop where just the act of him going about his business and running the team becomes a saleable asset, right? So yeah, I love that. I love that mentality of looking for ways to develop multiple income streams off of the same minutes.
Yeah, and it's leading by example. I mean, we're talking about leadership, and people say, well, Greg, and they say this to Jan, and I know you get this, Jan. Sometimes it's impressive to see how people will respond to the coaching. Jan's an exact example of, she says that, she came into this early on and was just okay with doing whatever the coach said. But what made it, instead of me making an assumption as to why you were that way, Jan, what was it about the leadership that you were exposed to that made you comfortable with actually following what you were being told? Because, I mean, not everybody's going to do that. Even if you're coachable, that doesn't mean that you follow the coach, because sometimes you don't like what the coach stands for or whatnot. But what was it about what we were doing here at the office that made you trust that if you did this, you were going to get something better? Can you share that?
Sure. So when I met you, you were so real at that seminar, that I felt like I really wanted to get to know you better and see exactly what you did. And then, of course, I shadowed in our office for probably a month while I was going to school. I didn't have my license, so I was shadowing, when I could before I started school. And I just, observed the environment and how it was I think that the pay it forward mentality, like everybody wanted to help all the time because they felt that they started with you. Everybody started from nothing. Pretty much you created this company from zero, right? Like anybody you were in the business with started from zero for the most part. And when you started recruiting agents initially, you only recruited new people because you didn't want to deal with the, different things that happened once they got into the business and they, maybe had some bad habits or whatever. So you loved taking somebody like me who knew nothing about real estate. I didn't even know Myrtle Beach, and just bringing me from somebody who had just literally moved to the town and knew nothing about the area or the real estate industry, and just create, help that person really become, a top producing agent. But I think that the thing that I was so impressed with was it was always like you said, success is measured by the amount of people that you help. So it was never about, it was never about the commission check. So I never felt like it was dirty. I always felt like it was an environment of people truly wanting to help people. And I think that a lot of our success stems from that people believe that we really want to help them. Outside of the fact that we're extremely knowledgeable, they truly believe that we want to help them. And I think that I really felt that I trusted you 100%, even though we could butt heads, at times or whatever, because it's, strong personalities, it's going to happen. But I just trusted you 100%. And I saw the result of what you had been doing, because I saw, people in our companies that were, that had come from nowhere and were doing 100 plus transactions a year. And I said, obviously it works. And I'm smart enough to know, I've been in business before. I'm smart enough to know that if you have these systems in place that are so fantastic and they work, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. So I also had a lot of blind faith. I just believed that you were doing, you were just, the environment you created was one I wanted to be around. And I just wanted to do everything that I was told because it felt right.
Yeah. I think if, I was going to just add to that for somebody that's thinking about maybe building a team or expanding, their business, one of the best ways to develop talent and get the most out of people is by being an example of how to get the most out of yourself. And I think that's what I really probably focused on, is with you, as well as, Brendan and a few others, or just the company in general, is like, it was, I didn't think that, I thought it was much harder to get people to follow my lead if I was just actually telling them what they should do and why they should do it, versus showing them, and versus being an example of how to get to the top. And being that example. So for those of you that I see, that are doing expansion, hey, stay in the grind, be an example so those people can follow you. And that's where you're going to develop the talent and get the highest success. If you guys keep listening to some of these podcasts, you got Jan, she says, I didn't even have a license. You have Brendan Payne a few podcasts ago, I didn't even have a license. These are people that are doing tremendous amount of volume and are now into ownership and creating, multiple revenue streams for themselves. You see the theme here is that these are people that actually started from scratch, learned it the right way, and built their business. Now, Jan, we're bringing in agents, and you're bringing in agents to the Barefoot office. As I told you some things, early on in your career, that you got to do this, you got to do that. What are you telling people now? Like a new agent's coming in and and you have your own dream of like, I'm going to develop this person into the next 100 deal producer, because, we love that, right? We love to just just know that we played a part of somebody who didn't have a license, and we help, transform their lives and help them build crazy things. What are you telling new people coming in that you have to do this and this and this and this? What's your spiel? What are you telling people?
I mean, it's a little bit different for me right now. I think that I've come to the realization and accepted the fact that not everybody wants to do 100 plus deals a year, and that's okay. So that's something that took myself and Brendan, quite a while to get over, because I think everybody should want to do 100 deals a year. Why not? Why would you get up for anything less, But, obviously there are people in this world that are very happy to do 10, 20, 30 deals a year. 10 is good for somebody who's retired with a little income and just wants to, make a little extra money to do a few things or whatever. So I had to come to the realization that not everybody wants to do what I do. So I talked to the people, obviously, initially about what it is that they want to do. What are their goals? What are they going to be happy with? And once I determine what they're going to be happy with after our conversation, I just, I always talk about, we have our morning ritual where we work from 8 to 11. Well, it doesn't matter what your ritual is. It's just got to be there. So you have to commit to some kind of schedule. Just, if you want to do 10 deals or 15 deals or 20 deals or 100 deals, we can help you get there. You just have to follow some kind of a schedule. It can't be haphazard, random. I'm going to come in today at this time, I'm going to stay home. Maybe I'll make one call. There has to be some kind of goal setting and schedule, regardless of what your actual goals are. So I'm very, I talk to them a lot about scheduling and things like that. And then, obviously, you always dig for motivation and everything. But if they want to do 10 deals, that's perfectly fine. And if they want to stay home and do it, that's perfectly fine. Maybe there's a mom out there that has children and wants to stay home and just make a little extra income. So whatever, I just tell them whatever, if you want to do 10 deals or 200 deals, we will help you get there. You just need to tell me what that number is. And then we're going to show you the way. And all I ask is that when we tell you how to get there, that you commit to the process of getting there, whatever that is, whatever the program is, whatever we devise together to, for you to get to that point, that you actually commit to doing it. Because we can.
If you had somebody right now that was doing 10 deals and they said, Jan, I've got to get to 50 deals and I'm willing to do whatever you say, what do you tell them? Yeah,
So I
I
tell
know
them,
you do.
okay, so then now
That's a
now
whole
it's
different ball game there.
it's a different, now it's how committed are you? I mean, are you telling me a story?
I'm
This is really what
committed.
you want
I'm
to do.
doing 10 deals. I've got to do 50 deals. My whole life depends on it. I'll do
Hmm.
anything you say.
Hmm.
What do you want me to do, Jan?
Okay, we're going to sit down and make a schedule, and you're going to go by this schedule, and we're going to hold you accountable to that schedule.
Hmm.
So here we go, 7:45. You're going to be in the office at 7:45. You're going to get on the phones. You're going to start calling for 3 hours. You're not going to talk to anybody about anything. You are going to stand there talking to people. The only thing you're allowed to do is go, make a potty break once in a while, but that's got to be like 2 seconds, not an hour. There's no smoke breaks here, that they don't exist. So you're going to be on the phones for 3 hours making your contact. You're going to make a minimum of 40 contacts in the 3 hours, and you commit to, the rest of the schedule. So we'll make a whole schedule for the afternoon, and then they're going to have to commit to a couple nights a week, a Saturday, whatever, to get where they want to go. And if I see and we're going to make a 30-day plan. So for me, it's like you want to have short-term goals for somebody who's making such a big transition, right? You don't want to, like, let's not do a 12-month business plan. Let's start out for the 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, we're going to check in and see exactly how you do it in 30 days and see what we need to adjust in order to get you to that goal. So we're going to do probably meet once a month in that time, just to make sure that, obviously we hand our numbers in. They're going to hand their numbers in. We're going to track them. At the end of the month, we're going to know exactly what they've done, how they've lived up to their commitments, and then we're going to go from there. So at the end of that 30 days, I'm going to, talk to them and see exactly what they've done. And if they haven't lived up to what they said they're going to do, then we have a meeting about, so you truly don't want to do 50 deals this year, because if you did, you would have done what you were told. So, it just goes
Yeah.
on and on like that.
So basically, the first thing for those listening, the first thing that you defaulted to is,
Mm-hmm.
if you want more business, then you've got to ramp up your outbound generation activities. That's the first place you went. Number one, you said got to have a ritual. We got to get consistent. Ritual is consistency.
Right.
Prospect from 8 to 11, 40 contacts. That's a ritual. That's consistency, and it's a major increase in lead generation activity. Then you'll have your things that you have to do, some follow-up and whatnot, and appointments that you have during the afternoon. But if you want to have sudden growth from 10 to 50, then you've got to come back in. You got to make night calls, which is increasing the generation activity again. But what happens when you call 5 days a week from 8 to 11, you call a list multiple times, and you find out there's some people on that list. You call 4 days in a row, 3 days in a row, and they're never there at 10. Guess what? They won't be there on day 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 at 10 o'clock. So that's why she's saying you got to come back in and call at night, so you can actually start hitting the people that aren't reachable during the day. And now you're going to add another 10 or 15 contacts, of night calling. And then there's going to be that smaller list that just you'll never be able to reach during the day or night on the weekdays. So you come in and you maybe make those calls on a Saturday. Again, increasing the level of activity that you're engaging in the area of lead generation. And you do that for 30 days. It's almost like 30 days of pain, right? It's like you go and do this 30 days in, and let's reevaluate this thing. If you want to have a quantum leap in your business, you have to have a quantum leap in your income generating activities. And then you do it for 30 days, you reevaluate, and you set a new plan based on the numbers, the tracking, and how well you're doing. That's what I heard you say. So hopefully that's very helpful for those that are looking for a breakthrough. But if you notice, Nugget, that was very simple. It just requires you to show up. And when you show up, you blow up, right, Jan?
I mean, I tell people all the time that real estate's the easiest business I've ever been in. You just have to commit to a process, and do it. So how many businesses are there in this world where you have total control over what you make?
Not many.
Right. But you do in real estate. It's all about what you put into it.
What is the challenge with that? So, okay, that's the pro of our industry, but what's the con of like being in business where you control everything like that?
What's the con?
Yeah, because the pro is, it's kind of like, like we always say in the office, it's like freedom is not granted when you get a license. It's after you get a license, freedom is earned based on the activities that you actually engage in. You eventually earn freedom, like what you and I are talking about. And when you said that this is the greatest business, what other business can you get in that where you have so much control of what you make? I kind of look at that as freedom. But on the flip side, we have all that control, but so few people are actually taking advantage of it. Why?
They don't want to work. They don't want to commit to working like that. And it's funny because it's not hard work at all. There's nothing hard about standing at your station and making a phone call. How hard is that? It's not going outside and unloading 50 trucks. It's simple to me. So I think that it's really the hardest part of it, the con, is that you have to commit to this process and actually show up. You have to punch in and punch out. You have to treat it like a job. People get into real estate and they just think that they should be able to, I'm going to get into real estate and sell a lot of houses. Well, no, you're not. It's not going to happen unless you focus on some kind of process and you come to work. You commit to coming to work and working while you're at work and then punching out and going home. I mean, it's got to be it has to be a job. And that's the challenge, because they get into it because they want to be flexible. Right? Everybody wants to be flexible, but the reason they get out of it, and that's exactly what you said at your first seminar, is people get into real estate because they want to be flexible. The reason they all leave real estate is because they're too flexible, and that's what it is. Easiest job in the world, but you're your own boss. So that's the challenge right there.
Yeah, I remember that. So I remember that outline of those seminars that I used to do early on, new career seminars. And I remember saying that. I haven't thought about that in a while, but yes, one of the reasons why people get into the business, there's 3 reasons why people get into the business. They want complete flexibility and freedom of their schedule. They want to actually be their own boss, and they want unlimited income. But it's interesting, it's like nobody seems to get unlimited income. They're not qualified to be their own boss. And the fact that they actually have so much freedom and flexibility in their schedule, they actually never work. It's like the 3 reasons why people get into the business are the 3 very reasons why people fail out of the business so quickly.
It's true.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Woo!
It's fun though.
I am worn out, Jan. Matt, Jan's been calling me the last couple of days because this is how Jan is. Hey, should we meet on talking about what we're going to talk about? Nah. Well, can we meet tomorrow and talk about what we're going to talk about? Okay. But I never do that with anybody else. And I just knew 100% because of our relationship that whatever we shared would be authentic, and hopefully it's it's well received and people can listen and take out some nuggets. So thank you so much, Jan. That was fantastic. It was awesome.
So Jan, how do people connect with you, especially if they're in the area and are thinking about joining Century 21 Barefoot?
So they can call my cell at 843-424-2545 or email me at c21janpitman@gmail.com.
Perfect. And then I know what you're going to say, Greg, but remind everybody again how they can connect with you.
Yeah, reach out to me, gregharrelson@gmail.com. I welcome any questions that you have, and I'll definitely answer them and give you my best bit of advice if you want to take it.
Perfect. All right, guys, and make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube, iTunes, or Stitcher, depending on whether you want the video or audio versions and what device that you have. You can also go and get Greg's free training video on how to get started in marketing automation so you know exactly who to call and why, which is kind of the start of that transition that you mentioned. So if you want to go on that same journey that Greg and Jan went to shift from doing all the outbound and transitioning over to where you can generate those inbound calls, like that is the process. So go to theleveluppodcast.com/free, and you can just pop your email in and get instant access to that video where we go into the basics of what that system looks like for you guys, which is what led to that whole transition to where you guys are at now, which is really like that is the dream. And most people want those, like you said, Greg, 5, 6, 7 calls a day of, hey, I'd like you to come out to my property and talk to me about listing my home, but it's earned. And that's the process that they have to go to. So just wanted to encourage people to go check that out. And guys, we've got a lot of great guests coming up. So be sure to tune into the show. Make sure to like the page here on Facebook so you get the notifications when we go live and do the show live here on Facebook. And with that said, guys, Greg, Jan, thank you so much.
Thank you.